Committee to order for the second special session of this year. We are anticipating that all of the HAFC members have just received through email a copy of the bill that we're going to be discussing. I've asked for a hard copy for myself because I'm old-fashioned. I'd like to actually hold a piece of paper in front of me. So that'll be coming forth. And what I'd like to do, since this is a new experience, particularly for me and many of the other members, is that I'm going to have our Vice Chair, Representative Sanchez, call the roll. We think we know who's here for the HAFC committee, but I'm going to have him just restate that to make sure and ensure that we do have a quorum for the committee. So, Representative, would you please?
Madam Chair, Representative Sweetser, Representative Garcia, Representative Rudy Martinez, Representative Crowder, Representative Sanchez, myself, I'm here, Representative Bandy, Representative Small, Representative Armstrong, Representative Herrera,
here.
Representative Salazar, Representative Trujillo,
Here.
Representative Stansberry,
Present.
Representative Anderson, Representative Chairwoman Lundstrom,
Here.
and who am I missing? Those are all the people I see. Oh, we got in the back, Representative Chatfield, Representative Brown. Thank you, we have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Alrighty, well, I'd like to thank all of you. Did we call you Representative Crowder? Did we get your name on here? Okay, very good. We just want to make sure that we've got everybody. We've got some of the folks that are virtual in other parts of the building, and I don't have that screen right in front of me, so we'll rely on our Vice Chair to make sure that we have that. Now, everyone should have a copy of House Bill 1. You should have that either by email or hard copy. Representative Crowder, do you have a copy?
Madam Chair, we have a copy of Senate Bill 8, and we're being told that Senate Bill 8 and House Bill 1 are identical. Can we confirm that, or?
We're going to make sure you get a House Bill 1, because that's what we're going to work from today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My second question, Madam Chair, was at one point in the past couple of days, we were told there would be an FIR and some other additional information to go along with this. Do we know if that's available yet?
Yes, the FIRs are en route. They should be here within the next few minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlelady.
Thank you, Representative. The FIRs are on their way. But those that do want a hard copy of House Bill 1, you should have that. We have some folks with their hands up, so we'll make sure those get out. So as soon as the information gets to all of us, we'll go ahead and start the discussion of the bill. I'll put the bill on, and I'll turn the chairmanship over then to our Vice Chair to conduct the meeting accordingly. But for the benefit of the committee, once the bill has been presented, it's my intention to allow for 30 minutes of discussion by committee members and then 30 minutes for the public. This is a new venue for us, and we've got to be able to allow the public to ask a few questions also. So we're going to spend about an hour on this once we get all the information in front of us. So we'll just hold our horses, and as soon as that gets distributed, we'll start. Thank you.
Are you on the meeting?
Mm-hmm. I am.
Yeah. Do you want me to send you the link?
I see a show of hands of those that still need a hard copy of the bill and the FIR. The committee members, please. Any of the committee members still need a copy? Okay, it looks like Phelps needs one. Thank you very much.
I think we're ready to get started. We have everyone present right now. I just want to let the committee members know, if you have a question, flag your hand or press the raise hand button. If you're on Zoom, and I'll mark you down. For you guys here that are present, just flag me down and I'll put you down for questions. So I guess we'll turn it over to Madam Chair to present the bill.
There we go. Well, good afternoon, committee. I do have a presentation this afternoon for House Bill 1. For those of you who were not familiar or hadn't had a chance to look at the Executive Office Proclamation, under the Therefore Clause for the second special session, it calls for, under the purpose, to consider the following objects and no others: making an appropriation from the Federal CARES Act for additional unemployment compensation benefits, to make grants to certain New Mexico businesses, to provide emergency housing assistance and emergency food bank services, make appropriations to the Department of Health and Administrative Office of the Courts. And this is exactly what the bill does. It has to stay within the framework of the Executive Office Proclamation. So what I'd like to do is just to take you through the bill just quickly, and everyone should have a copy of the bill as well as a copy of the FIR. The FIR, for the new people, it gives the detail of what the actual cost would be for each one of the items that we've got listed in the bill. So under the first section is basically the piece that pays for what we would normally call the feed bill. That pays for the expenses associated with having a special session. So Section 1 ties to that. Section 2A starts with the state unemployment supplement. This is a one-time supplement of $1,200 to each unemployed claimant, state and federal, eligible for benefits during the 7 days following the bill's effective date upon signature, and to those who have exhausted all UI benefits between September 12th, 2020 and the bill's effective date. This would be approximately 161,000 people. Section 2B of the bill, it applies to the small business support piece, and these are grants up to $50,000 to New Mexico for-profit and nonprofit businesses with at least one or less than 100 employees. And I need to say that this is administered by the New Mexico Finance Authority. We are asking for assurance that there's geographic dispersion of the grants and to give priority to leisure and hospitality businesses and businesses experiencing severe economic impact from the public health orders. Businesses are not required to repay the funds, and there is no payroll requirement to keep people employed. I'd just like to also note that this does not violate the anti-donation clause, because we're dealing with federal funds, so our state anti-donation clause does not apply. The next section, under Section 2, Item C, is the public assistance piece, and that's for $5 million. That's up to $750 per low-income household, provided the recipient did not receive a federal stimulus payment. This would be administered by the Human Services Department. There'd be some administrative costs allowed for this. Some people did not qualify for federal stimulus checks due to income, age, immigration status, dependency status, and other disqualifying factors. So HSD would be the agency that would administer that piece. Under Section 2, Item D is the emergency housing assistance and assistance for the homeless. This would be administered by the Mortgage Finance Authority. They would make awards for applicants that qualify under their current CDBG block grant program. What I really like about this is that we're actually leveraging some of this CARES money against the CDBG program. And like most of these programs, they've got a long list, probably a waiting list of people that could immediately use this. Currently, the Mortgage Finance Authority has received about 4,100 applications related to the current federal block grant program, and which has about $12.3 million available in funding. So once because the CARES money expires on December 31st, we would use the CARES money first, and then they'd be able to leverage in that CDBG money. The next section is E, which deals with food banks. We would look to provide $5 million to HSD to provide funding for 5 food banks in the state. These food banks and the distribution has been determined by HSD based on population, poverty, and unemployment rates. And those would include Albuquerque, Farmington, Clovis, Gallup, and Santa Fe. They've got existing food banks in their communities. The next, Section 3, is $10 million, and that is from the general fund to the Department of Health for contact tracing, testing, and vaccination implementation in FY21. Unused balances revert to the general fund, although the Department of Health has a lot of money that they've received from the federal government. We still believe that this $10 million could be put to good use, particularly when vaccination implementation occurs. You know, New Mexico has been identified as one of the 4 states that's gonna happen in. The next piece is a public health order enforcement for the office of the courts, administrative office of the courts. That's $200,000, and what that provides for is protective PPE equipment and other things that the courts may need. This bill is designed because it's an appropriations bill, and it appropriates funds to all branches of government. It doesn't need an emergency clause to it. It's just a simple majority. But it does clearly outline and tie to what is required and directed through the proclamation. So you all should have, Mr. Chairman, a copy of all the information in front of you as committee members, and certainly at this point, I would be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First person on the list, Representative Bandy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I noticed that it says in the bill, provided that the unexpended balance remaining on December 28th, 2020 shall be deposited in the Unemployment Compensation Fund. And it's my understanding that the reason this money needs to be spent by the end of the year is because it's designated for COVID expenses. And you're convinced that this would be a legitimate COVID expense in the Unemployment Compensation Fund?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I would. The very first section for state unemployment supplement for $194 million is exactly that. And I'm glad you pointed that out, Representative Bandy, because I think it's a good use. What that does is that ensures that we're not sending anything back to the feds.
And Mr. Chairman, was there an estimate from the FIR? I didn't have much time to look at it about what that figure might be.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, no, because we have to give both the New Mexico Finance Authority, Department of Health, Mortgage Finance Authority, and all these other groups that will actually be implementing our CARES money a chance to get that out. But if by any chance it doesn't all get out, then what's ever left would go back into the unemployment program.
Thank you. And another question is on page 5, line 3, the limitations on the money that would be paid to businesses. It says employ not more than 100 employees. Originally, I think it said between 1 and 100 employees. Does that mean, the way that it's written now, that contract workers like barbers, Uber drivers, dog groomers, in our country, welders sometimes, work for themselves and without employees, would they be eligible for this money?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, the intent for this are the sole practitioners. If you are a bookkeeper and you're the only person working for that business, we want to make sure that we capture that. If you're a professional writer or something like that, we want to make sure that those people aren't left out.
Thank you. I think that's an improvement from the way I understood the bill. One more thing that I think is kind of left out, and that is low-wage workers. My wife has some that are working in her medical office. They're paid, and they're in the kind of frontline workers in the medical office. They're paid less than $15 an hour, but they might be making more money if they were on unemployment. But there's no provision to help them out in here, or if they have to. And actually, 2 of the 3 people that work for her have had to take time off because they have household members that have tested positive for COVID. And I didn't see any provision in there that would help them out. Do you see that, Madam Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, what I understand is if someone is, as an hourly employee, is laid off, so to speak, during the time that they're trying to recover, they're not technically laid off, but they're asked to stay at home and shelter in place. What ends up happening is that they are eligible to apply for unemployment benefits at that point. My feeling also is in my own office, Mr. Chairman and Representative, there is a requirement under federal law that an employee can get up to 80 hours, unless that's changed, up to 80 hours in what would be called paid time off. I know in my office we have to pay that. But it's not specifically listed in here as such.
So the answer is an employee that may have had to take time off because of COVID, maybe not necessarily them, but my wife's employees in her office that had to take time off, but there's no way to compensate them in this bill. Is that correct?
They can apply for unemployment. Mr. Chairman, Representative, they would apply for unemployment.
Even if they're only taking off for a week or 2 because of the COVID?
Mr. Chairman, yes. Reduced hours is an eligible component.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Representative Crowder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just 3 pretty quick questions. When we passed House Bill 1 back in the June session, there was authorized transfer of $750 million from the CRF funds to the general fund, but only $325 million was actually transferred. And of that $425 million balance, this bill is contemplating the transfer of $319 million more. I think everyone that I was aware of, myself included, was anticipating the full $750 million would be transferred to the general fund, but it didn't happen that way. And so I think it behooves us to ask a few questions around that. And so as I do the math, if we transfer $319 million now from this fund for this bill, that leaves a $106 million balance. Do you know how the executive is anticipating spending that $106 million by the end of the year?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Crowder, it's true, we had $750 million in the last special session bill. That was removed. It was removed by the governor. And what we've been receiving in the LFC meetings is quarterly updates as to how each amount of that CARES funding has been spent. We understand that each quarter there's an amount that's transferred over from DFA. I know that that happened for the first quarter. I haven't seen the information yet for the second quarter. But the way this is structured, it has to be CARES qualified. It's been distributed to the appropriate agencies. Unless Don can tell me, Mr. Chairman, Representative Crowder, specifically at this point, I can't tell you that where the 106 million is, except that it's been designated for CARES purposes within the various state agencies for implementation. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, Representative Crowder, that's absolutely correct. The remaining 106 million, the law still designates that that goes to the general fund to replace general fund expenses that are CARES eligible. So DFA is still required to follow up on that 106 million to make an actual transfer the same way they did the 325 or I think it's 375 now that they've made so far. So it would be subject to those same rules.
Okay, so Madam Chair and Ms. Iglesias, I think I hear you say that by the end of this process, all the money will be transferred to the general fund and flow through that process. But a portion of it is being marked for the items within this bill, and so they're going to be expended in that manner. Is that correct?
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, that's correct, Representative Crowder.
Okay. It's good to know that that 750 is going to all be transferred. It just hasn't happened yet.
That's correct.
And so I just wanted to confirm that. My second item is on the final page of House Bill 1. By the way, House Bill 1, I believe, is a much better bill than the first draft that we saw. There were a lot of good improvements made along the way through the process of negotiations. I think you came out with a much, much better product. But on line 12 of House Bill 1, it talks about expenses relating to implementing and complying with public health orders. And my question is, are those expenses incurred by the courts for jury trials where they have to buy PPE equipment and that sort of thing? Or are those expenses intended to mean enforcement by probation and parole officers and those type things? So could you speak a little bit about what is this actually saying when it talks about related to implementing and complying with public health orders?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, this is expenses by the courts. So as an example, if the staff needs masks or they need sanitizing kind of cleaning or anything like that, I think you would agree with me, Mr. Chairman and Representative, sometimes the courts seem to be left out when we're looking at some of these things. I know that we didn't talk about that a lot during the last special session, but they have as many needs as any other department would, and they get a lot of public. I mean, they've tried to do things virtually. It doesn't always work. They have to be able to protect their employees also, as well as the public.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've received a lot of emails and calls regarding the enforcement of some of the rules out in the community, and I just wanted my constituents to know that's not what this fund is intended for. And so I thank you very much for that explanation. My last question is, early on in the process when the state received the $1.07 billion of money, some of that was sent to tribal and local governments. The note that I have here from about 3 or 4 days ago says that 34 million of that is all that DFA has sent over to the general fund of the 178 million that was allocated. Do we know how they are intending to get those funds expended by the end of the year? Do we have any idea? Is there a plan? And do we know what happens if it's not successful? Does that revert back to the general fund? We have language in our new bill that it reverts to the unemployment insurance fund, but where does this revert to if it's not expended, Madam Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Crowder. I have been reached out to the governor's office about these tribal and local government funds. I've been very concerned, as many of the LFC and HAFC members have been. What we've asked, and they have agreed to look into this, is about the possibility of having these local governments and tribes report back on where they're at, what's their status, do they feel they can get this money out, and if they can't, is to allow for others who need it to reapply. In other words, if there's a pot of money that we know is not going to get spent, let's go ahead and let those governments or tribes that need it apply. Now, that is my understanding and what I've been talking to the governor's staff about. I haven't seen anything yet in terms of a application or memo or anything like that, but I do know that they have reached out to local governments and asked them for a status report. Where are you? Are you gonna be able to spend this money? You know, and I think they've all been pretty good at reporting that back into the DFA staff. And my hope is that those governments that truly need it can come back and get that, you know, and reapply for it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it very much, and thank you for allowing me plenty of time. Thank you very much.
Betcha. You're welcome.
Thank you. We got about 15 minutes left for questions. Next is Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I too recognize the improvement in the content of the bill that we've received today, this version. So I salute you on the work you've done. Madam Chairman, because time is short, I want to go through them quickly and hope for short answers as well. So first is, there's $750 million that we appropriated in June of this year based on a projected deficit within the budget of the year we're in right now. So now we're coming back in special session at Thanksgiving and saying, well, we're going to take 330 million of that 750 million and put it over here and give it to these worthy relief needs. Madam Chairman, if I could, it's simply, I don't understand why we're not appropriating this money twice.
Rep Anderson, I apologize for interrupting you. There's been a request that people leave their masks on even when they're speaking. Sorry to interrupt. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Representative. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Anderson. We did initially have $750 million that came to the state of New Mexico under the CARES program. It was, as you have noted, it was budgeted in. That piece was, it was felt by, at that time, the executive that the legislature would not be designating where that money goes. We have a deadline of December 31st. We have this CARES money that is about to expire, and we need to get it out. We have an existing mechanism in place by these agencies that have already got established programs. We feel like we can get this spent within the next 30 days. I think if I understand your question correctly, are you asking me, Mr. Chairman and Representative, why we just haven't run this through the general appropriation process? Is that your question to me, sir?
My question is, we spent $750 million in my mind in June, and now we're coming back and saying we're going to take $319 million of that, and we're going to put it over here for this purpose. Right. Where does that shortcoming get funded from?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, this 319 million is within the reserve currently. It's booked in the reserve. So when we spend this, it's about a 4% reduction in reserve at this point. It's because of the limitations in terms of the time frame. If we don't spend this within, next 30 days, we lose it. And I think it's critical that we move that.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for that explanation. And coming from reserves, then it concerns me that since June, we've borrowed $124 million from the federal government to fund unemployment in New Mexico, where we suffer from one of the highest unemployment rates in the country. And that, I think, is running at the tick of about $70 million a month. So I'm really confused about how this balances out in January when we arrive and we find out that, well, we took $319 million and we put it over here, and that money is gone because we had to spend it by the end of the year for the purposes that we're considering today. But while we were doing that, we were borrowing substantial money from the federal government. If I'm correct, 124 million as of November 2nd. So I'm very confused about, are we drawing down our state reserves more than we think we are?
Mr. Chairman, no. And the reason is that if, in fact, we don't appropriate this and pass House Bill 1, we're going to lose that money anyway.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for that. I think my final comment is quick. I came to Santa Fe thinking about this special session today, and I thought, you know what really frustrates me is we're coming to Santa Fe to give away a month's worth of unemployment to pay people more than they make with their regular take-home pay in some cases. We're coming to grant money to businesses that have been impacted, but you're especially get to the front of the line if you're in the hospitality or the leisure business. And all of this makes me wonder, why aren't we talking about getting New Mexicans back to work and getting students back to school? Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Next, we got Representative Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chair. I just had a couple of questions on the emergency housing assistance. I'm a little bit concerned that in the FIR, MFA reported that it may be able to spend about 10 million. Allocated is 15 million. And I'm wondering, since it's CARES Act money, does it change the application process? Because it looks like 4,100 applicants have already applied, and a lot of them have been denied because they couldn't get their documentation in order to meet the requirements. So are the rules changing?
No. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative. The Mortgage Finance Authority currently has a CDBG grant for this purpose. What we would like to do is leverage CARES money with that CDBG grant to expand the program, and we would spend the CARES money first. So the CARES money would go out first. So those folks that had already applied that were originally going to be under CDBG, we would be spending the money, or the money would be coming from CARES.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Chair, for that answer. And then how is it designated percentage-wise for homeless compared to emergency housing assistance for payments and things like that?
My understanding on this is that it would go based on a proportional amount, right, right, I've been corrected, Mr. Chairman, Representative. It's not designated in statute here. It would be set by the Mortgage Finance Authority as to how those dollars would be spent.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Chairman. And then one of the other questions I had was on page 4, line 11, where it says to ensure geographic dispersion. So how is that mandated some way, or how are we going to ensure it?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative. When we talk about ensure geographic dispersion, what we were concerned about is we wanted to make sure that rural areas were represented and were going to be a recipient of these dollars. We have had, both the chairman of Senate Finance and I have had meetings with the New Mexico Finance Authority. They have assured us when they set this up that will happen. I happen to have a lot of confidence in their new director. I think when she tells us that, she means it. And she knows what the legislative intent is here. And that will be set in rules by the New Mexico Finance Authority.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chair, for those answers. I really do appreciate that, representing Frontier New Mexico that is suffering tremendously along with the rest of New Mexico. But I do feel like that's an important piece of this bill, and I do appreciate this bill, as others have stated, that this is a much better bill and I appreciate all your answers. Thank you.
So we got about 5 minutes left. We have Representative Small and Representative Sweetser. If you can be real brief on your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair. Just briefly, Madam Chair, the $10 million from the general fund, you mentioned that. Madam Chair, do you see the contract tracing as virus counts rise being important? And you also alluded to the vaccine rollout. Is it your sense too that the vaccine rollout will help all of New Mexico quickly get back to normal and actually go ahead, and that's why some of this money is important, Madam Chair?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative. Absolutely. I think that's this whole contact tracing and other things have been such a critical piece at trying to get our arms around this problem. And I absolutely do. I think that needs to happen, and I know that we've got a couple of hot spots, particularly down in the southeast part of the state and in your neck of the woods also, that really needs that help.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Totally agree, and I would just echo the comments that reflect the incredible care that's gone into this and the focus on all of New Mexico that is represented in this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Representative Sweetser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair. I just had a quick question. When you were talking about the food banks, you ran through the areas that were going to be, that the food banks were associated with, and I didn't catch those.
All righty, Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweetser. Food banks included in the request are located in Albuquerque, Farmington, Clovis, Gallup, and Santa Fe. And I need to say, Mr. Chairman, Representative, these food banks serve a much broader area than the city that it's identified in. I know that for a fact. I've got one in my backyard, and it does service people that are not just living in Gallup, but throughout the whole area. I assume the same about I know about the one in Farmington also. It does the same thing. I assume the rest of them do.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair and Mr. Chair. I kind of want to make that point for people listening. I know the food bank that serves my area is actually out of Albuquerque. So just because they're geographically centered in those areas does not mean they're going to not reach the whole area. And one more quick question, and I apologize if you answered this, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair. What are our reserves at right now?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, currently the reserves are about, I think about 35% at this point.
And Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, if this bill passes today, what will that do to our reserves?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sweetser, I think it takes us down to about 31.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So we have time for one more brief question. I know Rep. Brown, you wanted to ask, then if you can be real brief, the 30 minutes is up. This will be the last question, and then we'll go to public comment. People for public comment, please raise your hand in the Zoom, and that's how we'll identify that you want to comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Chair. I think we've kind of asked this question and had some answers already, but I'm just going to put it in simple terms for the benefit of my brain. Madam Chair, Mr. Chair. So I understand from listening in on Legislative Finance Committee meetings recently and everything I've read and what I see here in a memo from LFC that there is really no risk of reverting funds to the federal government, and I'm referring to the $750 million in CARES relief funds. Is Madam Chair suggesting this is not accurate, the statement that I read?
What I'm saying, Mr. Chairman, Representative, I don't have the memo in front of me, but I am familiar with it. I am happy to have our expert talk more about that, but let me ask her about that. My understanding is that if this funding isn't spent, which is the reason we put it in to the budget in June, we put that in there, is it has to be spent by December 31st. Now let's just ask here, is that correct?
That's correct. It has to be spent by December 30th, and LFC, in working with DFA, believes that all of the funds.
Sorry, so it does have to be spent by December 30th, and LFC, and we are working with DFA, we believe that all of the funds, all of the 750, can be spent for appropriate uses for the CARES Act. Now, we are designating in this bill that 330 of that be for the, or 319 of that be for these particular purposes, but we do believe the remaining balance can be spent on legitimate purposes. So we do not think of that portion there should be any funds reverted to the federal government. Now, there are CARES funding aside from the 750 that is not dealt with in this bill, like the funds to the local governments, funds that were allocated in other means by the executive, that some of those funds may or may not be at risk of reverting to the federal government, and they are working on trying to find ways to spend those, as far as I know.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ms. Iglesias. Next question, does the governor have any unspent CARES Act funding under her control?
It would be the remaining of the 1 billion, the 1.2 billion minus the 750. That's under executive administration.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to allow our expert to talk about this from the LFC analyst. So would you, Dawn, just repeat that? So
Sure. Of the 1 billion or 1.2 billion or so that the state received, only 750 million of that has been designated to the general fund, is dealt with in this bill, and was dealt with in the special session. The remaining amount of those funds were directed by the executive.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ms. Iglesias. So several hundred million, I think is the answer there. Also, Madam Chair, Madam Chair, if this bill does not pass the special session, what will happen with the federal money?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think what will happen with the federal money, with this portion that we're talking about, it will revert.
We think it will go to the general fund. We
Right.
think DFA needs to continue accounting for that, but we think all 750 can be spent on appropriate general fund expenses.
I'm going to ask her to repeat this. Go ahead, Dawn.
Our analysts working with DFA, we believe all 750 could be spent on legitimate expenses that are otherwise paid for in the general fund. So if these dollars were not allocated for the purpose in this bill,
they would go to the general fund, as was designated in House Bill 1 of the special session.
So, Mr. Chairman, in my opinion, because the state of New Mexico is in such dire need, and we have people that need these resources, well, I feel that we need to do this. We need to get this money out as quickly as we can, whether it's for unemployment, whether it's for food banks, whether it's for small businesses. And I think it needs to happen now.
Madam Chair, I thank you for the time you've devoted to my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to public comment. First on the list is Mr. Brian Urban. You have, we're going to give you 2 to 3 minutes for your comment.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Chair. This is actually Bill Jordan with New Mexico Voices for Children. I share an account with Brian Urban, and I'm sorry that it shows up that way. We really want to thank all of you and the governor for taking time this week to help those most in need. The work of this short special session is really New Mexico at its best. We know that too many of our communities are really struggling right now due to the health and economic turmoil caused by COVID. And this relief will go a long way, not just to help our families, but also to stimulate our economy by putting money into the hands of New Mexicans who will spend that money quickly and locally, helping communities and businesses across the state. We support the legislation, especially the elements that provide additional unemployment insurance to those who've lost wages, the food and housing assistance that will help families meet their most basic needs, and the economic relief for the families with children in our state who did not receive federal relief checks. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next on the list, we have Lily Irvin Vitella.
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, my name is Lily Irvin Vitella, and I just want to thank you and the representatives for coming together. I couldn't agree more with the previous speaker about this being New Mexico at its finest. I strongly support this legislation, and in particular, the work to alleviate hunger. New Mexico First has been working with a cross-partisan, multi-sector group of stakeholders in a policy work group since last July, but we really kicked in from about 80 people to over 400 people starting in March with the pandemic. And one of the things that has been very clear is that in order to address hunger, we really need a multi-strategy approach. So addressing unemployment, really doing the contract tracing, supporting economic development, and getting money into the food bank system is critically important. And, to the questions and discussions before, our statewide food bank system is leading the nation in terms of mobile delivery. Within the first month and a half alone, they spent over $1.2 million on food. And most of that, 85% of their funding, comes from private philanthropy and donors like you and I. And so I think it's really important to understand what a critically important role they've played in keeping families from missing as many meals, right? But families are still missing meals all the time, let there be no mistake, right? And so I think it's really important to understand how they've reached out to rural and frontier communities, how they've established new partnerships with pueblos and tribals, and how they've continued to serve people across the board. And while baseline hunger has always been an issue in New Mexico, it's been devastating. And food banks have reached out along with food pantries, along with soup kitchens, along with shelters to provide food and try to respond to the need. There's federal funding that's going away, and that means...
Hi, Ms. Lilly, could you wrap it up? We're running out of time.
Sorry, so I strongly support this, and I encourage you all to as well, because the issues can't wait. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Marcy Braddock. Marcy, are you there? Let's go ahead and jump over to David, and we'll go back to Marcy.
Hi, this is Secretary David Scrace. I'm assuming I'm the David that you called on, but I just wanted to speak in support of the bill. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, appreciate your taking this extra time to do the business of the people of the state of New Mexico. This is a fantastic opportunity to leverage federal dollars to provide support for the folks in New Mexico who are most in need right now. And I also want to assure you all that HSD, the Human Services Department, believes we can fairly and equitably administer both portions of the bill that have been assigned to us. We've been working with members of the House and Senate on both areas of the bill, and we think we can provide the general assistance and the food support for emergency food bank services and get those dollars to the places they belong by December 30th of this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's go back to Marcy Braddock. Are you there now? Looks like she's not there. I guess we're going to go to Representative Garcia for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair. Move a due pass recommendation on House
Hold on
Bill 1.
one second, Representative.
All right, we're going to, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are going to allow Representative Garcia to make the motion, but it isn't.
We're going to allow Representative Garcia to make the motion. It is unusual that we allow non-committee members to participate in our committee process, but we're going to allow this one time for the minority leader, and my friend Representative Podrell Colbert's going to be mad at me now, but I think it's just important, just as a courtesy to you, sir, because the public, this is the only chance they get to talk, but y'all can talk on the floor when we bring the bill down. But go ahead, and then we'll go back to Representative Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity, and I understand the rule that you have allowed me to speak. I would tell you that this is a much better bill than I saw originally. I have appreciated the changes that have been incorporated into the last draft. I think they met directionally some of the concern that I had. I would tell you that I'm still, I have one suggestion, and I know it's late in the game, but you'll hear it again when we get into the floor, is that we currently went, in this draft, go from 0 to 100 employee companies. And I think going to 0 was a really good thing because it caught a lot of people that had been left out historically. Although the cap is still set at 50,000, which I agree to, I think that's okay. I think we ought to open that top number up from maybe 100 to 300 or 400 so that we have more companies out there that have the capacity. Because the one thing I would hate to happen is that we create another fund that is underutilized, like our loan program that we did last year. And I don't think it would take away from any little companies. So as a member of the public and representing a district, I had 2 constituents outside of my district today that said that should be considered. So again, I would tell you this is a better bill than I saw early on. I appreciate the changes and the negotiation in getting here. So thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Go back to Barry.
Thank you. Going back to Representative Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair. Move a due pass recommendation on House Bill 1.
Representative Martinez.
Mr. Chairman and Madam Chair, I second that motion.
Is there any discussion? Is there any opposition? Can we have a roll call vote?
Representative, when you're ready, I can go ahead and call the roll.
We're ready.
Representative Allison?
Do pass.
Representative Anderson? I'm sorry, Representative Anderson, I couldn't hear. Representative Armstrong?
Yes.
Representative Bandy? Representative Brown? I'm sorry, Representative Brown, one more time?
Yes.
Thank you. Representative Chatfield?
No.
Representative Crowder?
No.
Representative Garcia? Representative Garcia?
Yes.
Representative Herrera?
Yes.
Representative Martinez?
Yes.
Representative Salazar?
Yes.
Representative Small? Representative Small?
Yes.
Representative Stansberry?
Yes.
Representative Sweetser?
Yes.
Representative Trujillo?
Yes.
Vice Chair Sanchez?
Yes.
Chairwoman Lundstrom?
Yes.
The motion to pass House Bill 1 do pass 14-3.
Thank you. And at this point, I'll pass it over back to our chairwoman.
Alrighty, we do have a do pass motion. Can we hit the? All right, there we go. We have no more business for the House Appropriations and Finance Committee this afternoon. So I think we will wait to get our committee report in to the chief clerk, and then the speaker will call us back down to, or back to the floor activities. Thank you, everybody.
And for members, you can use the same Zoom link to get back to the House floor when we reconvene this afternoon.